Hello nerds and welcome to Into the Wild, your monthly wildlife and conservation podcast where we look at what's going on around the world to do with nature and people. This year we're proudly partnered with the Royal Entomological Society. If you're like Nadia and I and you love insects, then we recommend checking out the RES's new associate membership. For just £15 a year, you can join their thriving global community dedicated and excited by insect science. This membership gives you access to the RES's library services, a digital subscription to Antenna, and discounts on their wide range of events and publications. Follow the link in the write-up of this episode to learn more and join. Good afternoon, Nadia.
Afternoon, Captain.
I didn't like that.
Did you not?
No, that literally sent a shiver down my spine. Oh my God, sorry. Why? Well, I don't see myself as a captain.
Captain Birdseye.
Is that my vibe? For this episode, you mean?
For this episode. Okay, now you're
with me,
She's gone
nautical,
right?
Nerds. She's gone nautical.
I'm a bit seasick. Bear with me. We're filming on a boat.
Yeah. Nadia, sweep the poop deck. Is that something that people used to say?
Oh, they must sweep the poop deck. One must not leave the poop deck unswept.
It's amazing that we class this as an educational show.
This is an educational podcast.
We actually label it under science.
Look, we are showing our lack of nautical language and I am not nautical at all as a person, but here we go. Here we go.
Nerds, welcome to a brand new episode of Into the Wild. Nadia, I've just come back from seeing you.
I know, that's lovely. I saw you yesterday.
Yesterday morning, and it was a beautiful sunny day on the Isle of Bute. And what was the evening like?
It was so bad. It was the kind of weather where Lucy had to put a fabric item through the letterbox to stop it flapping in the wind. That
is the most coastal sentence anyone's ever said.
Yeah, I know if it's been a bad night. I know if we've had a southerly, if there's like a woolly hat stuck in the letterbox.
That is insane. Yeah, it was a beautiful morning though.
Yeah, thanks for visiting. It was great. Nice to spend time by the sea.
Always loved my trip to the Isle of Bute. Always loved being forced to get in the sea.
You did really well.
I did. Although if you watch the video we got, it was the quickest dip.
It's actually so not many people know this, but this time of year is the coldest the sea gets. So all of that residual heat that it absorbed during the summer is now gone, and it's just had the winter to chill it. So this is a very cold time of year to get in the sea, but it hasn't stopped us, which is great.
I can also confirm that is true because I felt it. And I also want to take this opportunity to thank Mr. Leif Bursweden because he unknowingly lent me his swimming trunks.
Oh.
Make of that what you will.
I think that's fine. Anyway, this is an exciting episode because we so often cover terrestrial habitats, don't we? And
we do.
And for anyone that's working in marine biology, the job that everyone in the 1990s, kids in the 1990s thought that they would end up having, but didn't. We are so frustrated that actually, given that the oceans and seas cover most of the planet, they don't get as much airtime. So we're doing something about that today.
We're doing something about it. We're changing that. But before we do, we've got 2 segments we need to cover.
Okay.
So should we jump into...
Let's get dry.
Let's get dry.
Let's dry off.
Nerds, it's time for... Nature News! That's right, Nature News. Still just as intense as the first time I heard it. Okay, I'm going to go first if that's okay, Nadia.
Yeah, of course it is.
My first news story is the first bald eagle nest documented in over a century in Toronto. Experts say it's a significant moment as bald eagles were only just removed from the list of a risk species in Ontario last year. That's exciting.
That is exciting.
They're also a very culturally important species as well.
The bald eagle, why?
The bald eagle. To Indigenous communities around Toronto.
Great.
Just got a lot of cultural significance. So
they're very cool looking, beautiful bird.
Nesting back in the area is wonderful for a lot of many reasons.
Thanks.
What's yours? What you got?
Well, I feel like I'm going to counterbalance that with some negative news. Actually, So I actually just saw this. Do you know what? I saw something on Instagram the other day that kind of semi-mentioned it and I kind of ignored it. And then when I was just like looking up to see what's happening in the environment and the news, I was like, oh, fuck. So this is the news that the government has U-turned on its plans to phase out a badger cull. So apparently the badger cull is all back on, all guns blazing, literally.
Yeah.
So in the southwest of England, the vast majority of some of the local populations are going to be killed completely because where there is high risk of cattle contacting bovine TB. In this article on The Guardian, that was, I think, out on the 14th of March. Yeah, Tom Langton, an ecological consultant and badger expert, he's saying that ecologically this is just bullshit, really.
Yeah.
And it hasn't worked. It's failed to get the support of eminent scientists for over a decade, and it's caused some badger populations to go locally extinct. So no matter how much science we throw at it, it seems that the NFU or whoever, I don't want to just badmouth the NFU, but I just feel like this obsession, I don't know, maybe I need to read more about it before I go hard in with anger. But if we're getting to a situation where we are deciding to locally extinct an animal which has been part of our ecosystem for millennia because of something we are doing to the environment, I feel like we should sit down for a minute.
I feel like we've gone wrong.
Yeah.
It's a very interesting topic when you dive into it. We actually did an episode about it, I think maybe last year or a year before.
Ooh, I'll check that out.
With a wonderful guy called Alex Simmons, who wrote a book called Treated Like Animals. He was a vet. He's worked alongside the badger cull on both sides of it for a long time. Yeah, it has not worked, never shown any signs of working. So I do think it's about time we change it up.
What is going on?
Agree.
Sorry, what is happening behind the scenes where they're just like, should we just U-turn on that? Yeah, let's just kill more.
Let's just kill. Maybe it's a good time, nerds, start writing to your MP again. Get the laptop out, write to your
They
MPs.
need to know that whoever is lobbying the government, because there will be somebody lobbying the government to make this U-turn. It's not
100%.
Rishi Sunak just pulling out of his arse, because I don't think he knows anything about anything. The government will be being lobbied hard, whether that's within their own ranks or whatever. They need to know that the population of the UK, so you guys, the millions of people, are an even bigger lobby when our voices are loud and united and forceful. So do something
Get
about
your
it.
laptop out, email them and tell them you're angry. And if you want to just, tell your friends, put it in your Instagram stories, get that, create change. I'm going to come back in with something a bit better.
Thank God.
Good news. Not in this country, unfortunately. But France's lower house votes to limit excesses of fast fashion with an environmental surcharge. Key measures include a ban on advertising for the cheapest textiles and an environmental charge on low-cost items. So trying to drive out, create systems, even if these systems might not work, it's a good sign to start seeing them come in to start pushing out fast fashion.
Great. I'm happy about that.
I'm happy. So I'm happy something is happening.
H&M can kiss my ass. So the other bit of nature news I've got is a bit of tenuous nature news, but bear with me. Some of you will know that the other hat that I wear is that I am co-director of the Right to Roam campaign. And I want to happily announce that we did a mass trespass at the weekend. Over 500 people turned out. It was a massive success. This is off the back of the Bathurst family, who have owned the Bathurst estate for over 300 years. And paid, much of how that was paid for was through the slave trade. So actually, what actually paid for it was the bodies over 100,000 Black African enslaved people. And so much about our campaign and the roots of the campaign is the fact that our ecosystems are in absolute fucking free fall. And it is not the rambler, it is not the walker that is killing the badgers. It is the very, very few landowners that we've got that causing. And we could probably do an episode on this completely. We have done an episode about it.
We have actually, yes.
We have done an episode about it, actually. And I was on it. That's how we met.
As was I.
It was just a massively successful mass trespass. And the Bathurst estate is basically, they've decided on a whim after 300 years to start charging the public. The public, who, by the way, have been paying up until recently for the Bathursts because they lost their slaves. So when the slave trade was abolished, the taxpayer, that's you and me, were paying slave owners for the loss of their slaves up until very recently. So we've already been paying them, We also give them, they've had over £1 million in subsidies to manage their land. Now, because they can't manage it, they want to charge everybody £4 a pop to do so. You will keep paying for these aristocratic assholes to have their land and manage it in an ecologically fucked up way. So I just wanted to take a minute to swear a lot about that. Thank you.
Mission accomplished.
But we can put that in or not if it's not relevant.
Absolutely. Well, that's the end of nature news.
Great.
Now, nerds, you will know this year, Nada and I, Into the Wild, have partnered with the Royal Entomological Society. And as a result, we have a new segment where we talk about the work that the RES are doing. And this segment is called none other than the
Royal Entomological Society segment of the month.
Still can't believe that was in one take. I'm probably going to say that after every single time we hear it. Every time. So this is the RES segment where I just share a bit of news from the RES, which if you don't know about them, I urge you to look them up and see about some of the events they do. They run an amazing amount of accessible events, both online and in person, and some what we call hybrid events now, so that also recorded and on their YouTube. But the first thing I've got to tell you is that the Royal Entomological Society recently responded to the House of Commons with the Science, Innovation and Technology Committee report on the insect decline in the UK and food security. You can read all about their reply and what that said on the RES website, and you can find the link to the committee report. Next, we've got the results of the RES Student Science Communication Award 2023, and you can read the prize-winning articles about society's views on insects, overcoming adversity, and the ethics of collecting rare insects on the RES website. I will say, right now, all of these are linked into the write-up of the show as well. The RES Insect Conservation and Diversity Journal has a special issue on the ecology and conservation of urban insects published on the 12th of March. Again, the link is in the write-up of the show. And finally, on the 25th of April coming up, there is an event called The Impact of Extreme Events at the Queen Mary University of London, where you can join their climate change and medical and veterinary special interest groups as they come together to run this exciting joint hybrid conference on the impact of extreme events on insects. And that's the end of the RES segment of the month. There we go.
Hi.
So that's that's kind of we're turning into like a news bulletin show at the beginning, but I'm quite here for it.
I'm quite here for it actually, and I feel like I want to just like set aside half an hour a day just to like go onto these websites and just learn things.
This is what I love about it. This is what I love. Like, honestly, if you skim through on the RES, they've got so many journals on there. They've got so many like publications. And you go, do you know what? I'm just going to spend half an hour of a brew and just have a bit of reading.
I need to start doing that. I might set my lunchtime as a reading time where I learn about a book.
Absolutely. Sit down in the sun with a cup of tea and just read some stuff.
Lunchtime bug time, I'm going to call it.
Lunchtime bug time. Lunchtime bug time. Yes, absolutely. Nerds, just a reminder, everything I said about the RES there is linked in the write-up of this show or is available very clearly on their website. Should we dive into the main topic of today's show? Should we dive in?
Let's dive in. Put your snorkel on, Dalton.
Should we get my lobster pots ready? No?
Yeah, okay. It's just such a big ungainly item to get ready as you're about to dive. One chucks a lobster pot in, one doesn't dive with it.
Okay, Nadia, would you like to introduce this episode?
Yeah, I'd love to. Today we are talking about marine protected areas.
Wait, what?
Don't fall asleep. Don't turn off. We are going to make this fun. It is important, and we have to be responsible enough, I think, to explain all of the dull, boring bits about nature. I mean, nature's great and everything, but then what happens is we make really boring acronyms and laws around it to try and protect it, but we're going to make this sexy. So yeah, we're talking about marine protected areas. So like I said at the top of the show, so much of the time we talk about terrestrial nature conservation, because that's what we are. So
that's
of
what
course
we're
going
on.
to talk about our thing, right?
Yeah.
You know, like soil, trees.
Yeah, it's what I walk on.
Yeah, most of the time. I mean, I've seen you in the water. You're quite clearly not.
Not at home.
You're not at home. No.
But not out of my depth.
You're never out of your depth.
Never out my depth, though.
That is a tall joke. So So let's just talk about the sea and why it's so important. So yeah, like I said, so much of our focus around nature conservation or understanding the natural world. In fact, most of our knowledge about the natural world is based on what we can see around us in a terrestrial landscape. And the seas around us, or water bodies in general, have always been harder to monitor, observe, test, understand. And so it goes without saying that the world of animals that live under the ocean, under the sea, have been way less studied than stuff around us. I mean, think about, I don't know, 100 years ago, can you imagine even like, they used to wear those big, massive metal suits, didn't they? Just, like, walk along. I mean, can you imagine just being like, hold on, Frank, I need to stop and look at the sea urchin.
Imagine that was thought as convenient.
Yeah. I'll just slip in.
I'll just slip in that. Takes me 2 hours.
Should keep blow some oxygen down that tube. And I think, so it stands to reason that it is underobserved and I guess under spoken about in the world of conservation. But however, having said that, we do now know enough about them, and there are nature protection laws for these big bodies of water around us, our little island home and around the world, that are kind of comparable to what we have on land. So marine protected area is a designation. It's a land designation, a bit like LNR, Local Nature Reserve, SSI, which we've mentioned before, Site of Special Scientific Interest. It is just another designation that has given a legal protection. So there are laws, there are many laws, and our guest today talks brilliantly about those laws, knows far more about them than I do, who will get into it. So basically we have a system where there are laws to protect wildlife, but not just wildlife, actually, geological and historical structures as well. One MPA protects an old ship. And that is because, well, surprise, surprise, a bit like how we've got on land, the wildlife and the land under the oceans is also struggling as a result of what we've done.
Yeah, it's under pressure. It's delicate.
Pressure.
They're ecosystems at the end of the day. Let's call them what they are. They're ecosystems, and too much of one thing happening can alter that ecosystem, and not always positively.
Do you want to just throw out, Ryan, what do you think are some of the things that are affecting our seas?
What could they be? Could they be the same 5 things that are affecting everything else? Could it be climate change?
Yep.
Could it be habitat loss?
Ding.
Could it be pollution?
Yep.
Could it be overutilization?
Yes. And development,
development,
okay,
there we go.
So, and I think Ryan, it's that same stuff. Our seas are heavily polluted, and we just treat it like a toilet in so many ways. All of that. The episode that we did about rivers last month, we talked about where do rivers go? They go into the sea.
If they're dirty, the sea's dirty.
There is over extraction of resources, a bit like we see on land. So overtaking of fishing, and the method by which we fish. So dredging is something that you might have heard of, which is as horrible as it fucking sounds, which is just basically just raking the seabed completely. And actually that brings a really important point. When we think about our oceans, when we think about the seas, we think about them as this just one kind of habitat. They are not.
No.
Marine protected areas protect a really wide, diverse array of wildlife and habitat types that sit within the kind of marine. Like, honestly, marine is just a really big catch-all term.
So wait, so can you hear that? That's an insect noise, which means you've just stumbled across insects, and this is what we're going to talk about. Because you're right, it's easy to think that we're just talking about fish here, but we're not. Marine protected areas covers a lot. Because I spoke to someone about this very topic, about how insects, true bugs, some of which live around marine protected areas on terrestrial areas, or some of which live in the sea. And I spoke to a lady called Lana Cheng from California, who is a specialist on sea skaters, just about how important these animals are and how they can benefit from areas like MPAs. So I'm going to bring her in. This is what Lana said. Lana, thank you for featuring on the show on Into the Wild. It's lovely to chat with you. Shall we start with the obvious question? Do you want to tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Okay. I'm Lana Cheng. I work at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography at the University of San Diego in La Jolla, California. It is one of the oldest institution of oceanography in the world. I think it's only a little bit younger than the institute in Europe.
Wow. Okay. And
I'm a researcher. I'm a full-time researcher. I've now retired, but I'm still going on with the research.
Yeah. You can never put it down. You can never put the research down.
Academics never retire, right?
Absolutely. So tell us about your work with sea skaters, or tell us about sea skaters, these wonderful marine insects. Tell us about their diversity and life cycle.
Okay. To begin with, I should say that most people think that there are no marine insects. If you go to sea, you never expect to see insects. Insects are everywhere on land, but people normally used to say that there are no marine insects. I landed at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography after I married a marine biologist working here. So I was actually trained as an insect ecologist in Oxford, but what do I do at a marine institution? I can teach, but then I realized that I did some work in Singapore and there were some marine insects I saw on the shores. So I went to see the collection manager and he said, oh yes, we know there's something that's some insect found in the open ocean. We actually have people at the Smithsonian Institution interested in it. Would you like to look at them? Because they are black, they would stand out in plankton collections, and people thought they were spiders. They are small. They are the size of the adults, size of a black peppercorn with long legs. So they are called sea spiders, but they're actually insects. So he picked them out, and then I started working on them. After I started working on them, people would say, now I have this on my deck. I have this in my swimming pool. What are they? But insects are so diverse, I cannot do any identification for them. So I started contacting people interested in marine insects. And then I spent about 2 years editing a book on marine insects. And so for the first time, there is a publication on marine insects. That book was out of print very quickly because it didn't get too many copies printed. I managed to get permission from Elsevier, North Holland Press, to have it scanned and made available free of charge on the web. So anybody wants to do that, just go to Marine Insects and publish under the e-scholarship, UCSD. Anyway, so after I started working on them, I found that there are two main groups. One are found in the near shore, basically mangrove areas, and there are 5 species found in the open ocean. This is something we were totally unaware of mostly, that insects could be found in the high seas. They are found nowhere near the shore unless there's an onshore storm bringing them to shore. Otherwise, the only way to collect them is go to sea. And you'd be crazy for any entomologist to go to sea. And you can't do it anyway unless you have some connection with a marine institution that run expeditions to the ocean. So to tell you about the history briefly, they were discovered in 1822 on a Russian round-the-world expedition. Since then, almost all major oceanographic expeditions, including the Challenger and all the others, have seen them. So 1822 discovered in 1882 or something, the Challenger expedition started and they found some more species. So they found the oceanic species and then the coastal ones began to be discovered. Now we know there are maybe over 40 species of Halobates found along the coast of mostly tropical islands, where the seawater temperature is around 18 to 20 degrees centigrade. They don't like cold water. And then the open ocean species, there are still only 5 species from the original description from 1880s Challenger expedition. So I tend to concentrate more on the oceanic species because I could go to sea and do some short-term work on board ship. So that's the story now.
Amazing. It's mad to think that these kind of tiny animals exist in the open ocean as well. It's just so mad to think they're out there.
Crazy. And that is so unique. They're not only the only insect that can live in the open ocean, but what people don't really expect is they are the only animals in the whole world living in the open ocean. When you go to the beach, you wear a hat, you put on suntan lotion, and all the animals, when there's midday sun, they hide. Like all the desert animals in Africa, I mean, they burrow into the sand or they go into a cave. But these insects have nowhere to hide.
They're just on the surface the whole time.
On the surface, they do not dive. They have no wings. They're totally wingless for the entire life history. So what do they do? I have been trying to do that. Why don't they die? Because UV would damage your reproductive organ. You get sunstroke, right? If you sit in the sun. So what do? It is still a very difficult problem to solve because they're tiny. As I said, they are the size of a black peppercorn. Adults are about 5 millimeters in body length. And then what do the little nymphs fit on? The nymphs are 1 millimeter. So to let people know what they are related to the water skaters, pond skaters you see in the water in Britain. They are very, very common. But the gerrits you found in freshwater ponds and streams in Britain, the adults would be rather long and slender. They measure about, I would say, close to like 8 millimeters in length. But these things are more oval in shape, so they are more rounded. And it's very interesting. You go to sea, you never see them because the deck of the cruise ship will be at least, 10 meters above ground, above water. So you can only see them. You're really going to collect them. You go on a dinghy, you may find them. They move at 1 meter per second.
Whoa.
Zig. So if you want to catch them, it's difficult. And they're on the surface, we have to design a special net to collect them at sea. So
that's amazing.
It's very interesting to study them, but there are still many, many problems we have to solve. That's why I'm still involved in a few projects now to try to do something about the special adaptations.
And this, I mean, I think maybe I know the answer to this question. I'm just asking it for the sake of it, but because it might be very similar to our insects on land. But what kind of function? Well, I don't know, maybe for the open ocean, but what kind of function in the ecosystem are sea skaters, especially in the open ocean, what are they playing? Are they a food source a lot of the times for a lot of animals?
As I said, they are very fast. They're on the surface. So the only possible predators are seabirds from above or surface feeding fish from below. So there are a few species fish that we have found to have Helophates in their guts, but it's very relatively rare. Because in order to catch them, the fish has to come up from below and to catch them. As they come up, they will create waves, and then it will be sensed by the skaters, and they will just run away, right? Just disperse. Now, from above, the only seabirds that can feed on them are the noddies that are feeding, like picking one insect at a time. They have to be small and pick them very quickly. So in one area off the coast of one of the protective islands in Hawaii, there's a chain of islands. There are seabird colonies being studied. So in one species, the blue-gray noddy, during the reproductive season, there are a couple of females that are dissected. I mean, the gut, the crop of a couple of females that regurgitated the contents of the crop, and we collected them, and they were more than 100 and up to 200 Helophates in their stomach content.
Wow.
So during the breeding season, because when you find Helophates in a big patch, there can be several thousand, or you can find nothing in a patch of the ocean, or one or two. So when they occur in high density, they can be a very good food source. Also, they're very fat. When they find something to feed, they will store the food as triglycerides. So it's a good source for seabirds breeding. But as I say, there are very few seabirds who could feed on them. They've also been reported from one or two sea marine turtles, but that is a very rare occurrence. It's just by accident, I think.
Yeah. So I mean, also, I guess so our show is looking at marine protected areas, and when we think of marine protected areas, we a lot of the time think of fish, and occasionally we think of seabirds in that kind of what these areas are protecting. But are animals like sea skaters benefiting from marine protected areas? Are there examples where we have maybe certain species that aren't doing great that are only doing well in protected marine areas?
Well, insects are not supposed to be found in the marine environment to begin with, right? And so people never thought about insects. As a matter of fact, I told you that there are two groups of sea skaters. The more abundant group are found along the coast of tropical islands, and that their preferred habitat, or the only habitat actually, are mangrove, coastal mangroves, and mangroves are disappearing. So they are very much affected by areas that have been damaged. I think many of the mangrove areas in the tropics have been redeveloped and they're flooded. All the mangroves are cut. So in Japan, there are two species of sea skaters that have been historically reported from many of the islands offshore. And now they are endangered. You can only find them in a few coves. So there are two species that are listed on the red species list. And those two areas are now protected areas. So that's the first case in the world, I think, for ocean skaters to be protected.
Wow.
But when I go back to some of the areas, they have disappeared because of either ocean pollution or degradation of the mangrove area. They feed, we still do, I'm not 100% sure what they feed on, but basically the adults would feed on any insects that fall on the surface of the water. That's why if you get either mangrove along the shore or vegetation, you will find them. If the island, like the Cook Islands I went to, there were no mangroves and they are not there at all. And then in Fiji, whenever you find mangroves along the shore, if you look very closely under the mangrove trees, you will see them skating around. So mangroves are very important for their survival. Another thing is if there is an oil spill, that would affect them because they live entirely on the ocean surface, so surface tension would affect them. And if there's any oil spill, I think they will just die.
I think it's lovely to learn about animals like this because, like I said, when we think of marine protected areas, even though these marine protected areas can also cover, like you said, mangroves, or they can cover estuaries or areas like terrain as well as actual sea areas. But it's also nice to know that it's not just the fish and the birds. There's other life as well that are around, part of this wider ecosystem that we might never ever thought about before. And it might be people listening now that have only just learned about these animals going, there are other things at play. And it just shows you how complex this ecosystem of the ocean can be and how surprising it can be as well.
Exactly. Yeah. And apart from sea skaters, actually, if people go to the mangroves, they are going to find other marine insects existing there. But the only thing that are more or less permanently attached to water, so to speak, are the sea skaters. But you find beach bugs and also beetles. Beetles can be common, but they only go there to hunt at low tide. Therefore, people do not really consider them as strictly marine. But hellobates are really strictly marine. They cannot survive on fresh water. Brackish water, there will be a few species that can be found there, but ocean skaters are found strictly in the open ocean. And one thing that is quite interesting is that the lakes are laid on floating material. Therefore, with plastic pollution, if you get bits of plastic that are more than like a few millimeters in size, you may find eggs laid on them. So in the open ocean, it's not that easy to find solid substrates for the females to lay eggs. So they are really pretty short of egg-laying substrates. With the plastic pollution, it may increase their population in the ocean. They are also a very good indicator of ocean temperature change and also heavy metal pollution. As I said earlier, they prefer seawater at the temperatures like about 18 to 20 centigrade. So as the sea temperature increases, at the moment, they are found between 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south in latitude in all the three oceans, Indian, Pacific, and Atlantic Ocean. So as the temperature increases, they may be able to expand their distribution range. We don't know.
Well, Lana, thank you so much for coming on Into the Wild to give us a bit of information about marine insects in the form of halobates, sea skaters. It's been lovely to learn about these and lovely to feature them on the show. So thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. I hope people, when they go to sea on a cruise, may look out for them. Or on a sailboat is more likely, right? Okay, you're fine.
See, we forget, don't we, that insects are everywhere. And I know you'll be happy eating a prawn, won't you? But you wouldn't eat a woodlouse.
Not sure who she's talking to there, nerds, but someone that's relevant for someone.
Just putting it out there to all the sea captains.
But the point is, like you said, the point is you don't realise how many species are actually benefiting from these kind of systems.
Absolutely
if they were
not.
done well.
I mean, our seabird populations, the UK, the British Isles is one of them, a massively, globally important site for seabird colonies. And what do they need? The sea. So some of our MPAs are designated for seabirds, for example. Some of them, it's around that kind of estuarine habitat, that kind of intermiddle zone where sometimes it's land, sometimes it's not. How deep does the water have to be before it's classed as a marine area? So it covers a whole load of different kind of habitats. And, there are some areas under the sea that are really, really rocky. Some are really sandy. There are deep water areas that hold species that don't like being in shallow areas, and then there are shallow species that don't like. So we have all of the same things that we've got on land, but just under the water. So do bear that in mind of the complexity, the beauty that is our oceans. And if ever you get the chance to have a little snorkel, I cannot tell you how magical it is to go meet new bits of wildlife that you've never seen before, that are just as, common and just there.
All the time.
There.
What's your favourite? Have you got a favourite marine animal you like to see?
Don't even. I mean, don't even. How do I even begin? I feel like I'm a big fan of anemones.
Anemones. Yeah. No, that's solid. I love a crab.
Oh, aren't they funny? You've got such crab energy.
That's because I use my hands when I talk.
Yeah. And they're just, I don't know, I reckon you'd love someone up.
Yeah. I go, what's the really aggy crabs?
Velvet swimming crabs.
Velvet swimming crabs. Yeah,
you'd be a velvet swimming crab.
If anyone talks to me just a bit off, I'm like, what the fuck? What are you on about?
Just bro? Literally, if you walk past a velvet swimming crab, you're not even going in its direction, nowhere near. It'll come out and it'll start waving its little claws at you.
Yeah, and get off my land kind of thing.
So more on MPAs then. So there are 371 marine protected areas around the UK, and that's about 38% of UK waters, which are now protected. And as Caitlin, who is our guest today, is going to mention, protection, legal protection, doesn't necessarily mean that we actually get protection. So maybe...
Should we bring in the chat?
Maybe let's bring it in.
I think it's, like you said, Caitlin spoke so well on this. Myself and Nadia had the privilege of talking with Caitlin Turner, a marine biologist, and who, as she says in a minute, wears many, many hats in the marine world and conservation world. So this is a lovely chat with Caitlin Turner. Hi, Caitlin. It's lovely to have you on Into the Wild on our Marine Protected Area episode. How are you?
I'm great, thank you. It's a lovely grey day in Scotland.
It's a lovely grey day in London. Okay. Caitlin, welcome to the show. Before we get started with our chat with you, do you want to just tell everyone who you are and what you do?
Yeah, so my name is Caitlin Turner. I am based in Scotland and I'm 23 and I'm a marine biologist and conservationist, I guess it's sort of a side hustle now as well as my main jobs. I am professionally the policy officer for the Sustainable Inshore Fisheries Trust in Scotland, and I'm also a full-time voluntary trustee for Young Sea Changers Scotland as a charity in Scotland as well, focused on getting young people involved in marine policy making. And I wear a lot of other marine hats for different marine charities as well, because I can't say no to anything marine conservation.
Oh, we know that feeling. Caitlin.
I am so upset that I have an actual puffin-shaped hat. And when you said I wear different marine hats, I couldn't bring that out.
Oh,
Imagine if we both just put on marine hats and we're like us too.
I need a marine shaped hat. I don't have a marine
Yeah, we need to
shaped hat. I need
change
an
that,
animal
Caitlin.
shaped hat.
Yeah, you need
Yeah,
to
I do.
change
That would
that.
make this so much better. So I'm
If
going
any
to source
listeners
one for
out there
upcoming stuff.
have a marine-shaped hat, we can pass that on to Caitlin if you want.
Or also, if there's any
Yes,
listeners
please
out
do.
there
Anyone?
in general,
If there's anyone out there, please.
So, Caitlin, we're talking about marine protected areas today, which is, it's a bit of a bleh topic. We probably know that. A lot of our listeners will know that going in. But let's start at the basics of this. And we're speaking very from a UK perspective here. But what is the aim in the UK of a marine protected area?
So, there are different types of marine protected areas, and they all have different aims as well. The most common one, which we generally refer to when we're talking about MPAs, are the ones that are designated for conserving nature. But there's still lots of different names for these marine conservation MPAs as well. Down in England, they're called marine conservation zones. In Scotland, they're nature conservation MPAs, marine reserves, marine parks. So many different names, both across the UK and across the world, but generally these MPAs aim to remove or reduce pressures on marine ecosystems and species so that they can either recover or to protect fragile habitats as well. And some of the other MPAs as well that are around in our waters have been designated for the purpose of either carrying out research or for protecting important historical features as well.
Do these exist basically because of damage that has been done, or is this something that we probably should have had in place anyway in our country?
That's a good question. So we've had MPs sort of coming about in a sort of voluntary sense for quite a little while, and a lot of that has been driven by local communities sort of seeing the damage that's happened in their own sort of local marine areas and wanting to put something in place to protect the ecosystem, protect their livelihoods as well for the long term. Following all that, we ended up getting all the kind of lovely, interesting legislations and policies coming into play, with the first one kind of officially being the Wildlife and Countryside Act in 1981. That was like the domestic legislation which allowed for marine nature reserves to come about. And then marine protected areas were designated after that. And then we got up to the UK Marine and Coastal Access Act in 2009, which also allowed for MPAs, as they're then known in that act, to be designated throughout UK seas. And because marine conservation is a devolved issue to sort of the home nations, each home nation has got its own sort of administrative body and government that are responsible for how MPAs are managed, where they're managed and where they're created and things. So yeah, it's quite a patchwork picture across the UK, and some MPAs have been designated as a result of sort of international targets that have been put in place, like 30 by 30. Others have just kind of been generated like organically because there's been a need to do so. And that's generally been driven by local communities as well.
It's quite interesting to hear that local communities are driving a lot of that beginning change as well. Like you're seeing the issues happening and they're going, well, we want to kind of stop that for us as well as the ocean.
I feel like I want one around the Isle of Bute.
Do you?
Done.
Do you? Done. All right.
Of course. No, of course I do. I mean, I regularly go snorkeling around here, and sometimes I'm just like, I feel like there should be more things here. I know that there should be more stuff here. And we're not that far from the Isle of Arran, but, they've got seagrass beds still in place.
Is there a lot of large-scale fishing around Bute?
I think that there's a lot of dredging. My uncle Sean, but there's a lot of things, which I think we'll probably have a discussion around. But there's a lot of things, which I guess takes me to the next question, Caitlin, which is really important, is like, we have these things, so how are they managed? Because a lot of the time Ryan and I talk about terrestrial landscapes. So you just got like a bit of water. What are we doing?
Salty bit of water.
Yeah.
So this is where because this is a devolved issue, this is where it kind of gets fun as well, because obviously the UK government kind of deals with what happens in English waters and in terms of who manages the sort of offshore beyond 6 nautical miles in English waters, it's the Marine Management Organisation. For the inshore waters, it's the IFCAs, which I can't even, the Inshore Fisheries and Conservation Authorities, if I remember off the top of my head, is what it stands for. But that's England. And then you come up to Scotland and we have the Marine Directorate, which takes care of both our inshore and our offshore MPAs. And then Northern Ireland, it's the Department of Agriculture, Environment and Rural Affairs. And then the Welsh Government deals with their sort of implementation of MPAs in Welsh offshore waters. In Northern Ireland as well, it's for their inshore waters that they've got that sort of evolved competency. And then the UK government also has a part to play with the Blue Belt programme, which basically helps to implement marine protections in UK overseas territories as well. So it's very patchwork in terms of who's managing what and who's doing things in different areas and how they manage them. One of the kind of big examples of a disparity in management that's happened really fairly recently within last year was that England was designating highly protected marine areas, and they chose like kind of select pilot sites, did some consultations on them, and then identified 3 sites out of the initial 5 that they were going to progress with. Scotland wanted to bring in highly protected marine areas. It caused all kinds of chaos, to put it simply, up here. So Scotland originally wanted to do it for 10% of Scottish seas, but it wasn't clear whether that was going to be our inshore waters or offshore waters, where this was going to be, whether there was going to be pilot sites. It became, marine issues aren't like really generally talked about, but this whole thing ended up covered across all newspapers and all the kind of mainstream news channels. It got a song by one of our folk bands. It was chaos, and that policy as it was proposed has been scrapped. So England's now getting HPMAs. Scotland at the moment is not getting anything, unsure if they're going to come back in a different form and through different legislation, but that kind of just goes to show as well the sort of disparity in terms of how they're managed across UK waters, that there's differences in each of the home nations as well and how they do it, and who can only do inshore, who can only do offshore, who can do both, and who's going to ban everything and who's going to not. And
this is, I mean, what a minefield. I feel like I am in acronym soup, which I've so often been in acronym soup when it comes to nature protection, as it pertains to law, but also just like nature conservationists in general. I mean, there's so many acronyms, but I think you bring up a really good point, and the point is that it's hella confusing. And I guess for anyone listening, it's kind of like, what the hell is Caitlin talking about? There are all of these different systems that they're devolved, and it's all really, really confusing. We're talking here about, do we want to fuck our oceans up, or do we want to not fuck our oceans up? And ultimately, that's what it comes down to. And what our listeners will know on our show is that me and Ryan quite often talk about, like, we like to take a step back from all of it and just go, like, we are overcomplicating, we are over legislating, we are over sciencing so much of this. One of the points that you make is about highly protected marine areas and MPAs. So this is how stupid the system is, if you don't mind me saying, Caitlin, and I'm sure you're not a fan of it either, is that we've got marine protected areas, because I asked you about management, that are still not really doing anything great for marine life. So England then implemented, we better have highly protected marine areas so that we've got some protected ones, but then like some of them will just protect, as opposed to just protect. If you're designating something a marine protected area, then it should be protected for wildlife, instead of going, we did a really bad job of that. It's like, when you cut a circle out of paper and you're like, it's not quite a straight circle, I'll just give it another go. And then you end up with a tiny bit of paper. I feel like that's what we're doing, if people can imagine the MPA and then down to the highly protected. So I feel like Scotland always leading the way a little bit, just like, why the fuck do we need that? Because our MPA should just be protected anyway. I don't know what your thoughts are on that. And actually, just to give us a sense of like relief, maybe, can you give us the name of an example of somewhere that's getting it right around UK waters?
Oh yeah, we do have good examples of it. The areas that are kind of primarily getting it right though are little tiny areas though that are no-take zones. So one of these is the Lamlash Bay no-take zone in the Isle of Arran, and it's part of the wider South Arran Marine Protected Area. So it's like this tiny little dot within this wider sort of circle, and the wider circle like allows for certain things to happen and it manages like other things and prohibits certain things. This one tiny little dot is a no-take zone. So you can't fish in that, you can't take anything out of that. And that has allowed for an amazing recovery of the seabed in that area. And we've seen larger sizes of commercially important species like scallops and lobsters within this little area, which in a lot of cases there's also been evidence from around the world that where there's been this sort of increase in the number of commercially important species, they can spill over and then support surrounding small-scale fishermen as well. So lamlash is a really, really good example of that. Lundy as well is a really good example where it's kind of multi-zone management as well, but it's got a no-take zone too. And both of these were community-led, which I think is another kind of really important hope story. And that's the way that I think that this should work, because in the UK, across the UK, including in Scotland, our kind of approach to conservation, marine conservation, environmental conservation is very much kind of top down from the government level. And they just kind of hand down these management measures that communities are just expected to like it or lump it pretty much. And that's why there was also such a big pushback with the HPMAs in Scotland, because there was a real lack of that community engagement and a lot of confusion, and there wasn't really any evidence given for it. And as much as I'm all for needing highly protected marine areas to make sure that nature can recover, it was done largely with the community put on the side. And that's why there was such an amount of pushback, and the community really rose up against it. It united so many sectors that are otherwise against each other and kind of general conservation or general marine management. And they just went about it the whole wrong way. So I'm very much of the opinion that in order for things to work, and the evidence where we've seen things work both in the UK and overseas, it has to kind of come from the bottom up. Of course, you're going to need like the government to give the legislation to help provide funding for resources and things, but otherwise it should be driven by the communities as well, because ultimately they're the ones that are going to benefit from any recovery that they see, or that are going to be impacted by any management that gets put in place. And they're so intrinsically linked to the seas that they depend upon, especially in our coastal and island communities. So Lundy and lamlash are two of my favourite UK examples. And just for like an overseas one as well, which I think is just the most incredible story, is Cabo Pilmo, and it's in Mexico. Again, community-led, but it's seen an increase of, since its designation, about 460% fish biomass. So it's almost recovered the reef that it protects. I know, it's almost recovered the reef that it protects to a level as if it had never been fished before, back to almost being a pristine state, which is incredible. It's one of the most, it's one of the best stories that I've heard. Yeah, and it's actually, that story was the first, when I heard that, was really what made me become a nerd about MPAs, because I was kind of sitting at uni and I was hearing all these bad stories, and I was like, nothing's going to change. We're not going to get anywhere. There's nothing I can do. What am I doing? Let's just run off and see the barrier reef before it bleaches. Like, that's just, I don't know what I'm doing. But I read about this story from Cabo Pilmo, and I was like, well, why can't we do it here? Are we doing it here? Is there a way that we can do this here? Because I want to see this here. And that's now led to MPAs becoming my entire personality, pretty much. So
that's amazing, though. And it just, I mean, we speak about community conservation a lot on here, but it's like you said, when you've got these people that are the ones relying on it, that from their livelihoods and leading it, but it's the people that are going to be the stewards of it as well. These are the people you've got to have their buy-in, otherwise, these kind of systems get harder to manage in their own. And I think it was such a simple thing just to not include them or not let it come from them, really creates this domino effect of damage and a delay as well, to get this started up again, and to try and get community buy-in a second time is one of the hardest things to kind of achieve once you've not done it right the first time. So it's just kind of, it's such a silly, I think it's just such a fucking silly mistake to make with something like this. And I think when it is made, I'm just like, I pull my hair out going, what the fuck were you doing, bruv? Like, why did you ignore the very people? You're not going to be there. Do you know what I mean? You're not going to be right on in the ocean on that. So it's such a silly mistake. But would you say then for you, like, because, it's evident to say then, like Nadia said, they're overcomplicated. A lot of them are not reaching their aims of what they're trying to do. Do you think a lot of the time where we're seeing our errors in MPAs is due to a lack of community kind of buy-in with these systems? Is that one of the issues that we have?
Yeah, so I think that it's certainly one of the key issues, because you need the community buy-in and the sectoral buy-in for there to be any kind of compliance with management. If people are just like getting something dumped on their doorstep that they don't agree with, they're not going to comply with it. And then
Yeah.
and depending on the resources that the devolved governments even have to apply to policing these sites, they're getting away with encroaching into MPAs that they never wanted in the first place, or that they never kind of wanted to comply with. So that is a big problem, is this having the community buy-in in order to ensure that these things can actually succeed, because the local communities, if it's developed in a way that they can co-develop and co-manage their sites, it's giving them stewardship of their local marine environment that they depend upon. And that in turn can reap benefit for the community if they have that actual buy-in to it, rather than just being given all the decisions from somewhere like some little Western Isles nation, getting everything handed to them from Edinburgh, and they're like, well, you're not here, and you don't see the direct impacts on us, what we can sustain and what we can't. And that was in the English highly protected marine area, sort of when they went around with their 5 proposed sites. One of the examples was that they went to Lindisfarne, and they were basically going to do a highly protected marine area off of there. And the community of Lindisfarne was like, you can't do that. That's going to decimate the community, because with like our schools, we're a tiny little community. There's only a tiny little amount of like fishermen that depend upon the sea here. If you say that you can't fish there anymore, all of a sudden the fishermen are out of jobs, and then they have to move or look for employment elsewhere. And then the kids are out of the schools that are the fishermen's kids, and that just decimates that community. So fortunately, Lindisfarne is now not one of the pilot sites, but it's this sort of just handing these things down to communities and expecting them to just accept it. They won't, and if they're unhappy about it, they will fight back about it, because they've got such a sense of place and stewardship of their local area, and they're well within their right to say something about it.
Absolutely.
And it is a very kind of sensitive thing up in Scotland and their kind of highlands and island areas anyway, because they're facing depopulation for a range of other issues that we won't get into today. But that's something that's already so integral to them, that if all of a sudden their livelihoods are just stripped from them, then where have they got else to go? Like, there's not much else around. But another kind of problem that I don't, not to sound too cynical, but unfortunately some big industries have too much of the playing cards as well, handed with the government, and they do get a lot of sway.
I was going to ask you actually, Caitlin, just to round off our conversation, was to like, I mean, you've suggested so many of the like great things there around like having community buy-in, and obviously you've said like when there are community bought in areas and there are no take zones, wildlife bounces back quite clearly. But I guess in terms of just like those changes that need to happen, I think you've identified a couple there, but you're talking about big industry. Is that a change? Like, what does that look like?
This is where it kind of starts to get complicated as well, because big industry can be the big sort of offshore companies that are kind of coming in, and or big aquaculture companies that are coming into our waters. And I mean, Scotland in particular, we're kind of facing worsening spatial squeeze. So that's like your traditional sort of fishing or fishermen and fishing communities are getting pushed into smaller and smaller spaces, while big aquaculture companies that aren't even Scottish owned, they're like Norwegian, these giant companies are coming in, and the Scottish government's pushing for their expansion, and they're saying it's giving communities jobs. The communities are fighting back against these farms. Meanwhile, their actual traditional industries like the potters and creelers are getting forced into tinier and tinier areas. It's the same for kind of offshore wind. Rosebank's just been approved near an MPA as well. So obviously they've got oil and gas have got a kind of foot in the door as well with it all. And then even, and it gets kind of a bit more sensitive still, because you're kind of wanting to support your lower impact guys. So they're generally like your potters and creelers, and that is a requirement in the UK Fisheries Act as well, is to incentivise lower impact fishing because it's got less of an environmental impact. But then you have like your bottom trawlers and your dredgers, which are really highly impactful activities, and they're not necessarily big industrial guys. They are actually, for a lot in Scotland around our coastal and island communities, they're small scale and generational. So it's how do you balance that, because they have a lot of sway with politicians as well. So it's, for me, like another kind of whole thing that needs to change in the system is also how we view the management of our seas. It has to be spatial. Like right now, everything's very piecemeal, and you've got policies and proposals coming through the door in every which way, and you don't know what's going on, and 500 consultations coming out at once, and it's impossible even for us that work in the field to respond to all of this and have our voices heard, and we're paid to do it, let alone for fishermen or coastal communities or anybody else that isn't paid and doesn't have that allocated time to do this. We need a more comprehensive and cohesive approach to how we manage our seas, and we also have to have that sort of bottom-up community-led approach to ensure that big businesses and big industries aren't getting all the sway when it comes to decisions, and that our smaller voices aren't being pushed out. It's absolutely critical. And that's the change that I think we need to see moving forward, is more of a bottom-up approach, and just making things more spatially managed and more cohesive than what they currently are, because it's everywhere. And it's not benefiting anyone, and it is giving everyone a headache. And yeah, the environment's not benefiting, and neither are the people with the current approach to it across the UK.
Caitlin, thank you so much.
You've
given us a lot of information, but like a really good overview as well. I think we already know it's a complicated system, or systems, sorry, plural, with how this works in the UK. But you've given such a great overview of what's needed, what's happening that's great, and where we're seeing our errors as well. So thank you so much for being on the show and joining myself and Nadia in going through this maze that is marine protected areas.
I know. It's the one thing to take away is that designation does not mean protection, and most of our MPAs are paper parts. There's a fun phrase if people didn't already know that today. It's a shame, but maybe I'm naive in thinking it, but I do hope that things can get better, and that we can see improvements.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much, Caitlin.
Thank you.
There you go. Once again, another massive thank you to Caitlin there for being on Into the Wild.
Well, babe, gives me such reassurance that there are people out there who are like super passionate about an area of work and super determined, and actually the kind of person that's just totally open to like understanding exactly what's going on with all of these systems and doing something about it.
Absolutely. And I guess a call to action, which we quite like to do on Into the Wild when we've spoken about a topic. This one's quite tricky because it's quite big. It's quite heavy to do. I mean, for me personally, I don't really eat a lot of fish. Maybe I do it a couple of times a year. And if I do, and if I'm in a small coastal town in the UK, then I try to go to those small restaurants. I don't go to big names, and I try and find somewhere that's small. They've probably got a little vessel, and that's how it is supporting that. Or ask around.
Ask
and do some research.
Where does like locally caught fresh fish, and then I think,
and you'll get told.
At the end of the day, right? Like we do not. You need to see the oceans as they are our wilderness. They are wild animals, and we're taking to it. I don't think it's normal that we have fish several times a week. If you're someone that wants to eat fish, eat it in those really special occasions when you go to a small coastal town. And visit, and actually make that a treat that you have every now and then, as opposed to just, it's a privilege, it's not a right, and we don't really have the fish stocks to sustain it. I personally choose not to eat fish. I wouldn't eat fish anyway because of, what they've got in them because of the pollution in our
there's
seas.
an abundance of reasons. Yeah, 100%.
And actually, what I would encourage people to do is try corn fish fingers, because I'm telling you, man, fish finger sandwich, like white bread, cheap ketchup, fish finger sandwich. If you want that, if you want just like sometimes those quick, cheap hits, I'm telling you, they are great.
And do you know what? I'm going to change mine. Don't be put off by tofu fish and chips. Tofu fish and chips is really, really nice. It's all about the batter.
Come round mine. Lucy makes a really good tofu fish and chips.
It's all about the batter.
Be a batter.
So I guess that's our only call to obviously write to your MPs if you're not happy with something, but apart from that, I think for our MBA chat, be aware.
Learn about things.
To the show you have. Okay, nerds, that just leaves us to say, don't forget to follow us on social media at Into the Wild Pod on Twitter, Into the Wild Podcast on Instagram. It is trying times for all of us, but if anyone has a few quid left over and you want to support Into the Wild and the show, it's continuing to bring you content, you can do so at ko-fi.com/Into the Wild Pod, or click on the link in our bio. We'll be back next month with a brand new topic to dive into and try and unpack for you all and give you a bit of guidance in the world of what the hell is going on with nature. Thanks for tuning into the show, nerds. If you don't already, make sure to follow us on social media at Into the Wild Pod on Twitter and at Into the Wild Podcast on Instagram.
And if you're able to and would like to, you can support the show by tipping us at ko-fi.com/IntoTheWildPod. That buys us the equivalent of a coffee, and we use it to fund more podcasts for your ears.
But until next time, keep well and live the good life.